There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being awake when others around you are still sleeping. Not physical sleep, of course, but the metaphorical slumber of consciousness, the state of moving through life on automatic pilot, guided by unexamined assumptions and unconscious patterns. Perhaps you know this loneliness intimately. You felt that peculiar isolation that comes from seeing what others don't see, from questioning what others accept without thought, from sensing depths and complexities in experiences that others seem to skim across like stones over water. This sense of separation can be profoundly painful, leaving you wondering if there's something wrong with you, if you're somehow broken or defective for not being able to participate in the collective dream that others share so easily. I want to offer you a different perspective today, one that might transform how you understand this experience. What if this feeling of being apart isn't evidence of something missing or damage in you, but rather a sign of something awakened? What if your inability to remain asleep in a sleeping world isn't a flaw, but a developmental achievement? This understanding resonates deeply with the work of developmental psychologist Jean Piaget, who recognized that human consciousness evolves through distinct stages, each offering new ways of constructing and engaging with reality. The loneliness you feel may not be a punishment for seeing too clearly, but a natural consequence of perceiving from a more complex stage of development than many of those around you. Consider how Piaget described cognitive development. He observed that as children mature, they don't simply accumulate more information. They actually transform how they organize and interpret experience. A child in what Piaget called the concrete operational stage perceives and understands reality in fundamentally different ways than a child still in the pre-operational stage. These aren't just differences in knowledge, but in the very structures of consciousness itself. Similarly, spiritual or psychological awakening involves shifts in how consciousness constructs reality, not just what it knows about that reality. When you undergo such shifts, you aren't just adding new ideas to your existing worldview. You're developing new cognitive frameworks that allow you to perceive dimensions of experience that were previously invisible to you. This expanded perception naturally creates distance between you and those still operating from less complex frameworks, not because either of you is deficient, but because you're literally constructing different versions of reality based on different developmental capacities. This perspective offers a profound reframing of the isolation that accompanies awakening. You aren't alone because you're strange or defective, or because no one understands you. You're experiencing the natural developmental gap that occurs when consciousness evolves beyond conventional structures of meaning and perception. This gap isn't a punishment or a mistake, but a necessary space for the integration and stabilization of more complex ways of constructing reality. Just as a butterfly needs the isolation of its chrysalis to complete its transformation, awakening consciousness requires periods of separation from consensus reality to fully develop and integrate new perceptual capacities. The loneliness you feel is not evidence of failure, but of growth. Not a sign that something has gone wrong, but that something is going profoundly right in the evolution of your consciousness. Piaget's concept of cognitive equilibrium helps illuminate this process. He described how when we encounter information or experiences that don't fit our existing mental frameworks, we experience a state of disequilibrium, a feeling of cognitive discomfort that motivates us to restore balance. We do this either through assimilation, fitting the new information into our existing schemas, or through accommodation, changing our schemas to incorporate the new reality. For most people, this process strongly favors assimilation, maintaining existing frameworks by filtering out or reinterpreting information that will require more substantial restructuring. But awakening involves a radical accommodation, a fundamental reorganization of how consciousness constructs reality. This reorganization creates not only internal disequilibrium as your own frameworks transform, but social disequilibrium as your perceptions increasingly diverge from collective agreements about what is real or important. I want to pause here and ask you directly, how has it felt for you to be awake in a sleeping world? What aspect of your awareness have created the greatest sense of separation from others? Have you found ways to bridge this gap while still honoring the truth of your perceptions? If you feel moved to share, please leave a comment below beginning with being awake has meant, and tell us about your experience. Your story may help others recognize that they too are not alone in their awakened solitude, that there are many of us navigating this territory together, even when the journey feels isolating. I read every comment, and your experience matters not just to me, but to our entire community of awakening individuals finding their way in a world that hasn't caught up to their perceptions. The good news is that you truly are not alone, even when the loneliness feels most acute. Throughout human history, there have always been those whose consciousness has awakened beyond the collective dream of their time and culture. These individuals have often played essential roles in human evolution, holding perspectives and possibilities that weren't yet accessible to majority, but that pointed the way toward more expanded and integrated ways of being human. You stand in this lineage of awakeners, those whose consciousness develops ahead of the collective curve, creating pathways for others to follow when they're developmentally ready. Understanding yourself in this context can help transform isolation from a personal wound into a meaningful aspect of your evolutionary role. Not something to overcome as quickly as possible, but necessary space from which your unique contributions emerge. This doesn't mean the loneliness isn't painful or that connection isn't important for your well-being. Piaget recognized that cognitive development doesn't happen in isolation, but through interaction with an environment that both challenges and supports the emerging structures of consciousness. Similarly, awakening consciousness needs engagement with others for healthy development, both those who share your expanded perceptions and those who offer different perspectives that help refine and ground your understanding. The challenge is finding or creating these connections while accepting that perfect understanding may not be possible across significant developmental differences. Just as an adult can't fully explain abstract concepts to a young child still in concrete operational thinking, some aspects of awakened perception may not be communicable to those whose consciousness hasn't yet developed the frameworks needed to hold them. This understanding can help you navigate relationships with greater compassion and discernment, rather than expecting others to see what you see or feeling frustrated when they don't. You can recognize these differences as natural expressions of developmental diversity, not personal failings on either side. This doesn't mean condescension or seeing yourself as superior, but rather acknowledging that consciousness, like all aspects of human development, unfolds along a spectrum with many variables affecting its evolution. Just as you wouldn't blame a 10-year-old for not grasping calculus or expect them to share your appreciation for complex literature, you can extend the same developmental understanding to differences in spiritual or psychological awareness. This perspective allows for connection across developmental differences without demanding sameness or pretending that significant perceptual gaps don't exist. The sleeping world is your enemy or something to fight against. In fact, Piaget's work reminds us that each stage of development serves important functions and has its own integrity and value. The concrete operational thinking of middle childhood isn't deficient compared to formal operational thinking. It's exactly what's needed for mastering the tasks of that developmental phase. Similarly, conventional consciousness isn't wrong or bad. It's a necessary stage in the evolution of awareness that provides stability and coherence for the majority of people. The issue isn't that most people are at this stage, but that our collective systems and structures don't make space for the full spectrum of consciousness development, often marginalizing or pathologizing those whose awareness has awakened beyond conventional frameworks. Understanding this can help you direct your energies toward creating spaces that support the natural evolution of consciousness rather than judging or trying to force awakening on those who aren't developmentally ready for it. This brings us to another crucial aspect of Piaget's work: his recognition that development occurs through the interplay between nature and nurture, between innate tendencies and environmental influences. While each person has their own developmental trajectory influenced by numerous factors, the right conditions can support and facilitate growth. Similarly, while spiritual or psychological awakening can't be forced, you can create conditions that support the natural evolution of consciousness, both for yourself and for others. This might mean cultivating practices that help stabilize and integrate your expanded awareness, or creating environments where different levels of consciousness can interact in ways that stimulate growth without creating unnecessary conflict or confusion. It might mean finding languages and frameworks that can translate awakened insights into forms that are more accessible to those at different stages of development, building bridges of understanding across perceptual differences. As your own awakening continues to unfold, you may discover that the initial painful separation gradually transforms into a more nuanced relationship with the sleeping world. Just as Piaget described how advanced cognitive development leads to more integrated and flexible thinking, spiritual maturity often involves moving beyond rigid either / or categories toward more inclusive both / and understanding. You begin to recognize that awakening isn't about escaping the dream, but about becoming conscious within it. Not about rejecting the world, but about engaging with it from a place of greater awareness and compassion. You learn to move between different levels of perception, to speak languages that can be understood across developmental differences, to find connection without compromising the truth of your experience. The distance between you and the sleeping world doesn't disappear, but it becomes a creative space for engagement rather than an unbridgeable gap. This more integrated relationship with both your awakened awareness and conventional world doesn't happen automatically. It requires a development of what we might call metaconsciousness, the ability to be aware of awareness itself, to reflect on how your consciousness constructs reality, rather than simply being identified with your current construction. This parallels what Piaget recognized as a key feature of advanced cognitive development: the capacity for metacognition, for thinking about thinking itself. As this capacity develops, you become able to hold your perceptions with both conviction and humility, to communicate them in ways that invite rather than demand, to remain open to the ongoing evolution of your understanding. You recognize that awakening isn't a destination, but a continuous unfolding, not something you achieve once and for all, but a process that continues to transform how you perceive and engage with reality. If these words have resonated with something deep within you, if they put language to experiences that have been difficult to articulate, I invite you to join our community of awakened souls walking this path together. By subscribing to this channel, you're connected with others who understand what it means to be conscious in a world still largely dreaming, to hold perceptions that haven't yet entered collective awareness. Each video is created as an offering to those navigating the sometimes challenging terrain of expanded consciousness, providing perspectives and frameworks that might help you make sense of your unique journey. This isn't about numbers or metrics, but about nurturing connections among those committed to conscious living, creating a field of mutual support for the continued evolution of awareness. Remember, you are not alone, even when the loneliness feels most acute. Throughout the world, there are others whose consciousness has awakened beyond conventional frameworks, who see what you see and understand what you understand, even if you haven't yet found them in your immediate environment. This community exists across time and space, a lineage of awakeners that stretches back through human history and extends into our collective future. You belong to this lineage, and your awakened presence serves the evolution of consciousness, even when it feels like you're holding awareness in isolation. The very perceptions that sometimes separate you from others are also your gift to our shared world, offering possibilities for more expanded and integrated ways of being human that will eventually become accessible to more people as consciousness continues to evolve. The path of the awakener has never been easy. It requires courage to see clearly in a world that often prefers comfortable illusions, integrity to honor your perceptions when they diverge from collective agreements, compassion to hold awareness of suffering without becoming overwhelmed by it. But this path also brings profound gifts. The authenticity that comes from living in alignment with your deepest knowing. The freedom that emerges when consciousness is no longer confined by unconscious patterns and unexamined assumptions. The capacity for connection that arises from seeing others not just through the lens of your own needs and projections, but as they truly are. These gifts don't eliminate the challenges of being awake in a sleeping world, but they provide the resources needed to navigate those challenges with grace and purpose, to transform the pain of separation into the joy of conscious participation in our collective evolution. As we continue to walk this path together, remember that the awakening of your individual consciousness is part of a larger evolutionary process unfolding through humanity as a whole. Just as Piaget recognized that cognitive development follows similar patterns across diverse individuals and cultures, spiritual awakening represents a natural development of human consciousness that's happening in different ways and at different rates throughout our global community. Your individual journey matters not just for your own growth, but for our collective evolution. Your awakened awareness contributing to the gradual expansion of what's perceptible and expressible within our shared human experience. In this larger context, the loneliness you sometimes feel reveals itself not as an unfortunate side effect of awakening, but as a sacred space from which new possibilities emerge. Your temporary separation serving the eventual integration of more expanded awareness into our shared reality.